Nikki Haley at Hudson. Last week, she was in Taipei and she delivered a speech and called for more international backing for Taiwan, international presence for them, and just general pushback against mainland China. So could you, I know you weren't there for it, you've been in Taipei many times, but could you just kind of sum up the speech? Was it important? Did it say what you would want to be said? And are there things that are actionable from it?
Well, Nikki Haley is a tremendous politician, and she was America's top diplomat to the United Nations during the Trump administration. Well, I was working for her boss, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo at the State Department. So we had some collaboration, and she absolutely represented the best of the United States in the international arena. Now, Nikki Haley went to Taiwan and gave a great speech last week at the forum there, hosted by the Taiwanese Foreign Ministry. And in that speech, she made headline by calling for more international space for Taiwan, and Taiwanese people needs representation at the international arena. She further calls for United Nations to consider Taiwan's status internationally. So I think it was a very, very well done speech, and obviously Hudson is very proud of her for making that speech, and we, as a matter of fact, in our social media outlets, we promoted her speech quite a bit.
I saw that the main kind of takeaway or actionable item was calling for Taiwan to become a full member of the UN, even though that's obviously not, that's blocked by China right now and blocked by China for Taiwan to be in any kind of international organization. But is that a new call? Is that a familiar call? What's your reaction to that?
I think she stopped short of calling for full membership of Taiwan's representation at the UN. What she said was the UN should revisit the issue of Taiwan's representation.
Okay.
So I think that's a very, very positive step, first step.
Okay. So what would the next step be, or is there anybody else who has made similar calls that we can reference for comparison?
Oh, yeah. I mean, Secretary Mike Pompeo has been the only senior U.S. official who had publicly called for American diplomatic recognition of Taiwan as a sovereign and independent state. He made this headline 2 years ago when he and I went to Taiwan together, and when he spoke at the Prospect Foundation. In that speech, for the first time ever since 1972, a U.S. senior official openly said that Taiwan deserves Americans' recognition. And just a few months ago, the day after the inauguration of President Lai Ching-te in Taiwan, Secretary Pompeo also made a speech the day after inauguration on May 21st, 2024. I was there when he delivered the speech to the Formosa Republican Association. Mike Pompeo specifically elaborated why this is such an important issue for the United States government to recognize Taiwan as a sovereign and independent country.
Could you get a little more specific on what his recommendations are and what steps could be taken, concrete steps that could be taken on the U.S. end to support Taiwan's integration into onto the world stage?
Now, let me just actually, instead of paraphrasing what Secretary Mike Pompeo said in May, let me just read a few paragraphs to see exactly what he said.
Yeah, great.
So in that May 21st speech in Taipei, Secretary Pompeo said, I quote, "It is time for the United States to recognize Taiwan as the sovereign and independent country it so clearly is. This is not just a diplomatic gesture. It is a recognition of reality. It stands for justice and a stride towards global stability. The context of the three communiques upon which U.S.-China relations were originally predicated has evolved. The primary issue at hand was the representation of China, a competition in which the People's Republic of China was deemed the legitimate representative. However, Taiwan has long ceased its competition with the PRC over this claim. Since the late 1990s, under President Lee Teng-hui, Taiwan has not only moved away from this contest, but has also forged its own identity, an identity overwhelmingly endorsed by its people. Today, a resounding majority of Taiwanese identify themselves solely with Taiwan, not China. End of quote. And then Secretary Pompeo talked about why the U.S. government should really recognize Taiwan as a sovereign and independent country. The call for Taiwan's diplomatic recognition by the United States is thus a call to affirm this existing reality. Taiwan governs itself democratically. It controls its territory, engages in international trade, and more importantly, it does so as a separate entity from the People's Republic of China. None of Taiwan's territory is under the PRC's sovereign or administrative control. To suggest otherwise is not only misleading, but flies in the face of the observable facts. This is a very important announcement by a U.S. senior official.
Yeah.
And Secretary Pompeo concludes his speech with this paragraph, which I think is very, very poignant. Recognize Taiwan is not merely a policy adjustment. It is a moral imperative, a strategic necessity, and a rightful acknowledgement of the democratic processes that define a true sovereign state. It is time for the United States to lead boldly, act justly, and recognize Taiwan as the independent and sovereign nation it truly is. End of quote. So those are very powerful words coming from the mouth of Mike
Very
Pompeo.
clear.
Very clear and very, very important. And he's not just saying this as a political campaign slogan or something, just to make China mad. No, he's very cool and rational to lay out the reasons why. And there is some kind of echo within even the Biden administration. If you look at the statements by the current administration, the Biden administration, as all previous administrations have said, do not recognize the Chinese claim that the UN resolution 2758, as China always said, has solved the representation issue of Taiwan. It only solved one issue only, that is the representation of China, People's Republic of China, and the UN, but not Taiwan.
So if a U.S. administration were to act on Pompeo's words here, what would be the first concrete step, whether it's legislative or international diplomacy? What would be the first concrete step that we take?
I would advise that the United States should inform China that we will continue to recognize you, Beijing, as the legitimate government of China. But we are also going to recognize the government in Taipei as the legitimate government of Taiwan, or Republic of China in Taiwan, whatever you call it. This is just a recognition of reality. Not only it's a recognition of reality, but also it's a recognition of the moral obligation of the United States as the leading power of the world to recognize the reality, to recognize the legitimate call for sovereignty of the people in Taiwan. Now, if we defend the sovereignty and independence of Ukraine, we should do the same for Taiwan. The whole purpose of defeating Russia in Ukraine is to defeat Russia's argument. It's a logic of aggression by Moscow's claim that Ukrainians were not sovereign and independent.
Yeah. How do you defeat China's claim on the other side of that same coin? We can declare it, but is it going to require a competing UN resolution or something of the sort?
That's a little technical.
Right.
But I will say this: United States has always held the position that the status quo, in other words, the separation of China and Taiwan, can never be changed through the use of force.
Yeah.
That has always been the position, the bottom line position of the United States government since June 25th, 1950, the day after the Korean War broke out. We always hold this position. And this is all the way through the 50s, 60s, 70s. And this was a bedrock principle of the restoration of the diplomatic relationship between the United States and China. Every president has said this to the Chinese government very clearly. If you try to invade China with force, the United States will respond with force. And this is not only enshrined in the presidential executive statement but also is strongly implied in the Taiwan Relations Act of 1979.
Wonderful. So let's shift gears a little bit to another story. We're still getting storylines out of the Paris Olympics in regard to the Chinese team. This time it's about Olympic gold medalist Chuan Hongchan, who is an Olympic diver who competed in Tokyo, also won 2 gold medals in Paris. She's now getting bullied in China for buying her mom an iPhone? Miles, what is happening here?
Well, first of all, let's just say something about this Olympic gold medalist,全红婵herself.
Yeah, please.
She's a 17-year-old girl. She is absolutely adorable. Not only that, she won gold medals for China in the Tokyo Olympics when she was 13. And
Wow.
She is a phenomenal diver. She is absolutely great, not only loved in China, but also the entire world. If you watch what she did in the Olympics, she's absolutely great. Of course, many people in China view her as the pride of China, which is all very, very justifiable. She's from this very poor village near southern province of Guangdong, and her parents were just ordinary farmers, and she was trained at the Chinese national team, completely separated from her parents since she was a little baby. So that's why she felt obligated to buy something for her mom after she became the national sensation.
Yeah.
So what she bought was from the Apple store in China was the iPhone 15 Pro Max, which is exactly the iPhone I'm using right now, which is great. And then, so some people videotaped the whole transaction when she was there, and there's an Apple store over there, and the whole nation exploded with condemnation, calling her unpatriotic. This is totally ludicrous. But also, if you understand Chinese logic and Chinese reality, this is no surprise at all, because it's happened all the time.
So is this a pattern? I mean, sounds like China's cultural, economic nationalism of sorts. What is the history and context?
Yes, this definitely fits in a pattern. It seems like this kind of almost like spontaneous outburst of Chinese xenophobic feelings, sentiment. And then if you look deeper, it's not. The timing is very, very peculiar. This kind of a nationalistic outburst normally is controlled and manipulated by the state. The Chinese government totally has the capability to control, to censor all these ugly comments, bullying, but they don't. So the release of this outburst is very interesting. The reason is very simple, because Apple just announced it's going to come up with the new iPhone 16.
Yeah.
So China is in this really heated competition for Apple's popularity. So the government has issued edicts after edicts urging people to buy Chinese-made phones, Huawei in particular.
Right.
So do not buy Apple. So this kind of a state-sponsored economic nationalism. Now, this is the pattern. Now, every time there is an international crisis of sort, the China normally is culprit for those crises. Chinese government always encourage this kind of economic and nationalism outburst. I'll give you one example. Well, I'll give you several examples. In 2005, Japan was actively seeking permanent membership in the UN Security Council. China was not very happy. And also, at the time, the government used the proof of the Japanese history textbooks to launch a nationwide boycott of Japanese-funded department stores. The textbook issue is basically a non-issue if you live in a democratic society like Japan, United States. Japan's Ministry of Education endorses 8 versions of textbooks to be adopted by high school history classrooms. Of the 8, one of them was written by a revisionary right-wing group, which basically said World War II Japan has no responsibility for. And that was basically, of course, an international outrage. But the schools in Japan were given choices. More than 1% of Japanese high schools chose that textbook. That's how the democracy works. You give people choices, so the bad ones will not be chosen. China used that as an excuse to launch the sort of nationwide boycott of Japanese goods. So there was a anti-Japanese demonstration all across China. Now, in 2008, that was the year when China hosted the Beijing Olympics. So during the Beijing Olympic torch relay in Paris, the torch was snatched by Tibetan protesters in Paris. China went crazy about this and fanned a boycott nationwide against the French supermarket chain called Carrefour. So this is a really, really big deal. Carrefour, by the way, just exited China completely with a great sense of loss and disappointment. Now, in 2012, you have another nationwide boycott against Japanese goods, and many Japanese stores were smashed and looted nationwide, and riots erupted. That's because the governor of Tokyo basically bought the Senkaku Islands and from the individual Japanese owners. And China went nuts about this whole thing. And then 5 years later, in 2017, South Koreans decided that in the face of a North Korean missile threat, decided to deploy the U.S. Army developed missile defense system called the THAAD, Terminal High Altitude Air Defense System, so THAAD. And China thought this is crazy. This is not good for China's national security. This is on South Korea's territory. So they bullied South Koreans to give up this U.S. weapon system, and South Koreans would not budge. So the Chinese government fanned a nationwide economic nationalism against the Lotte Group. Lotte Group is a South Korean private company that lent the South Korean government the land upon which to deploy this missile defense system. Korean entertainers were banned from going to China, and Chinese tourists were banned from traveling to particularly the Jeju Islands, which is a popular tourist destination. So this madness went on for months and months and months. So this is absolutely crazy. Now, the latest one, of course, took place just about 3 years ago. In 2021, many companies in the United States, in Europe, and in Japan stopped using cotton made in Xinjiang by slave labor, particularly the Uyghur slave laborers.
Yeah.
The Chinese government launched a nationwide, prolonged boycott of Western and Japanese companies that do not use Xinjiang cotton. So this is another wave of Chinese economic nationalism. So anything as tiny as buying an iPhone for your mother could trigger a nationwide boycott and outrage. So this is just, China is a country that's basically is psychologically very fragile. It's like a giant crybaby.
Any act is existential, whether it's missile defense or a national hero buying their mom a phone. Like it all becomes the same threat towards the ideology. That's a great picture you painted there, Miles. So in talking about that ideology, that shifts well to our third topic today. And last week, the CCP marked the 120th anniversary of Deng Xiaoping's birth on August 22nd. Xi Jinping hailed Deng as an outstanding leader with high prestige, recognized by the whole party, the whole army, and the people of all ethnic groups in the country. So Xi lauded Deng's legacy, but Miles, how similar are they actually, or are they pretty different?
I think they're the same leopards with the same spots, right? There's no difference to me. Xi Jinping is lauding Deng Xiaoping right now because he's facing a lot of domestic resistance. He tried to elevate himself above Deng Xiaoping. He tried to reverse Deng Xiaoping's so-called reform and opening up. By praising Deng Xiaoping, Xi Jinping also praised himself because he considered himself as the logical inheritor of Deng's legacy, which is true. And unfortunately, most people in the West, particularly many people in Washington, D.C., still think Deng Xiaoping and Xi Jinping are two different animals. They're not. They're the same. Because Deng Xiaoping wants to develop economic situation. He wants to use economic prosperity to buy political stability. Xi Jinping is the same thing. And the only difference between Deng Xiaoping and Xi Jinping is that Deng Xiaoping believed China was relatively weaker than its arch enemy, the West, led by the United States. And Xi Jinping believes that the East has risen, the West has declined. So he believes it's time for China to act tough, to act what Deng Xiaoping would have acted in the first place. So if you look at the titles, Deng Xiaoping was championed as the chief architect of the reform and opening up. Xi Jinping himself is still the chairman of the Deepening Reform and Opening Up Commission of China. And so, which brings us to the question, what the heck is reform and opening up?
Yeah, right.
That's a very beguiling. Many people in the West believe it's a step toward democracy, toward the open market. That's nonsense. Reform and opening up basically means that China is going to allow portion of its economy connected with the international free trade system and benefits from the global free trade system, while in the meantime, keep a tight political control and dictatorship over the Chinese people. Don't forget, Deng Xiaoping was the ultimate perpetrator of the brutal Tiananmen massacre of 1989. Deng Xiaoping, in other words, was a diehard Marxist-Leninist. So is Xi Jinping. There's no difference.
想成为全球沟通达人吗？六度人工智能语音克隆技术帮你实现梦想。在这个新时代，语言障碍已成过去。我们隆重推出六度人工智能语音克隆系统，这项由欧美亚顶尖专家研发的突破性技术，让你可以克隆自己的声音，并将文字转换成145种语言和方言，提升你的个人和职业生活。想象一下，你可以在日本参加商务会议，在巴西上课，或与意大利的朋友畅聊，而这一切都用你自己的声音、他们的语言进行。操作简单，只需点击几下，无需复杂的科技知识，就能享受无缝衔接的体验，让世界向你敞开。从商务到教育，从媒体到娱乐，应用场景无处不在。企业可以更好地与全球客户建立联系。教育机构可以提供多语言学习，媒体可以创作更丰富的内容，触达更广泛的受众。今天就来体验这项革命性技术吧！访问，迈向你的声音无国界的未来。